Very comfy.
Well,
you might want to repeat it because I'm not sure people on Zoom can hear.
Okay. David Gordon's question is, why don't I just use my home as my office? For which I have two answers. One is that my office is crammed with books from floor to ceiling and filing cabinets.
I thought your home was too.
My home is as well, that's true. But my wife Jody would not really welcome a tripling of the books that currently occupy much of my space. I also have a house in Vermont, which is 3 floors of books, floor to ceiling.
You clearly need another house. That's the issue.
Right. So that's one reason. And the other reason is that I think it would probably not make for marital harmony for me to be at home all the time.
We'll strike that from the minutes there. We don't have to add that. Why don't you carry on, and then I will invite questions both from the folks here and from the folks on Zoom.
There. Okay. The membership report. Well, as of 2 days ago, we have 3,841 members, which is 29 more than we had last year at this time. The figure that I usually give when people ask what our membership is about 4,000. And it will be that by the end of December, we will probably peak over 4,000 again, and then it will start to fall off. The reason being that we moved a few years ago to a membership cycle that is quarterly. So every quarter, a certain percentage of our members disappear, have to be hounded into re-upping their membership. And sometimes that can take the better part of a year where people get back to us, oh, I forgot. We have a very high percentage of people who join again. We encourage people these days to join for multiple years to save us the time and trouble of harassing them constantly to rejoin. But in general, our membership is doing quite well. That compares favorably to other membership organizations, which these days are in a trough. Around the country, it's in the range of 8 to 10% of members in membership organizations have been falling off, and we're growing, not by leaps and bounds, but the fact that we're growing at all is a good testament to where we are. I'm sure if Chris was here, he would give a fuller account of what we're doing to drive membership. I would, for one thing, want to give credit to one of our board members, Jay Bergman, who has been hugely successful at a little enterprise that we just started earlier this year. We spot articles in the press that seem interesting and important to us. We check to see if those individuals are already members of NAS. If they're not, Jay Bergman writes them a personal letter and convinces them to join. And it's been remarkably successful. We've been bringing in sort of the right kinds of people who've been pre-tested by already showing their willingness to publish important opinions on controversial topics. So I think that's one of the ways in which board members can serve an organization like ours. And we have one board member who's taken it to heart and made a big deal of it. This is, of course, something that the members around the country can do, both for their own affiliates and for the national organization. If you're reading the newspapers or indulging in the online stuff, of which there's a multitude of things, things will catch your eye. They catch mine. And I think one of the little routines that we've now built into our dispersed staff is that each member of the staff is responsible for a daily inspection of a handful of websites or newspapers, and then reports back in daily on what the highlights are of that trolling. It saves me the time of having to read 50 or 60 separate websites, but it is a hugely good way for NAS to stay on top of the news that we don't create, as well as the news that we do create, trying to do that as well. So I think that's all I have to say about membership, but questions on membership issues.
If you're online, please just raise your hand. You should be able to find it in your Zoom panel. Should you have something you'd like to say or ask?
Chance, can you say what you just put up on the screen? Because I can't see it.
Oh, it is the membership and fundraising page, Peter, from the, yes, from the board book.
Which I haven't seen. Okay.
It's largely aligned with what you're saying.
In the same ballpark.
Right.
I have a question.
Yes.
Peter, I was thinking that if a person joins as a member and to give you our credit card, that we're automatically renewed 1 year later unless we indicate otherwise, which I'm thinking about saving you time and your staff time to call people and that kind of thing. Is that not true? Or
Yes, that's for the most part pretty common, especially if you, well, only if you renew online. If you renew by mail, of course, you know, it'll cycle over. We'll have to reach out to you and ask you to become a member again. But if it's online, I do believe we have it. So you have to opt out for the recurring renewals.
Mm-hmm.
okay, I'm just hoping I use my own credit card.
So I assume then that over time, we've just moved more and more to automatic renewals. So the time spent in harassing people to renew is going down.
Ideally, it would go down over time. I don't know the actual figures on that. That would be, of course, a Chris Kendall question. But I do think that as you know, it just progresses, that more and more people get used to that. Yes, it will hopefully save us some time and effort and money as it comes to stamps and emails and trying to come up with creative things to get you all back.
That and people buying lifetime memberships and people taking out multiple year memberships, that all helps. We just got a report that we had commissioned from a outside group to review our fundraising. And one of the items in the report was a recommendation that we return to the once a year model. And I've turned that down. I think it's a bad idea. Our members clamored for a rolling approach. We gave it to them, they like it, and I'm not going to take advice that we backtrack on something that we've already achieved. What else on membership? I think every organization that has a membership component loses members. There is a rate of, you know, people die off, people retire and get no longer interested in primary issues, but some people also get pissed off. And that's, I think, in a strange way, a measure of what we're accomplishing, and that we are willing to take on issues that are controversial and willing to lose members if they strongly disagree with what we're doing. But when somebody quits, I don't just say, so long. I write to them and I ask them why, and we sometimes get into a correspondence. Sometimes they change their minds, but it's important that that communication be open and that we know why people are disaffected with us or why they just have lost interest. And that's part of what maintaining strong membership is all about. So if you're running an affiliate, my advice is don't ignore the people who are unhappy. You can learn a lot from them, and that can make you a stronger organization. The other
Thank you,
item.
David. I was just going to say thank you for your question. Appreciate it, David. Thank you.
We have the topic of our publications and programs. And do you have a slide on this?
I do have one that I can share. Yes. Let me just get to it without.
Off the top of my head, it's going to be hard for me to recite our publications because there are a lot of them.
So this is, here, let me make sure the Zoom folk can see it. 1 second here.
You're gonna do the top hits, right? Like,
Yes. I'll just give, sorry, 1 second here. Would you like for me to?
Well, you can give the top hits and
Okay.
I'll have comments on some of them.
Okay, yes, just jump in. So, you know, as NAS continues to do its work, primarily with research and large scale or larger reports, this year we've released a handful of reports. Those are comprehensive restructuring, diversity, equity, and inclusion at the University of Texas at Austin, taken for a ride, how Rhode Island's social studies standards are shortchanging students, the company they keep, which is pretty pertinent at this moment in time, but it's the organizational and economic dynamics of the BDS movement. It's the boycott, divest, and sanction movement on campus, and shifting sands, confounded errors, and more recently, diversity statement than dossier, the rise of DEI cluster hiring on culture and higher education by John Seiler. And you can see all those little report covers here.
Right. Well, I do want to jump in on the company they keep about the BDS movement, which was written by our research associate, Ian Oxenod. It follows by a matter of months a report that Neetu Arnold published in the fall of last year, titled.
Wait, which report? I'm sorry.
Neetu's November 2022 report.
There's hijacked.
Hijacked, yes. Hijacked is about the Middle East Studies Centers. So we have two substantial reports published before the atrocities that have now riveted the nation's attention on what's going on in higher education, among other things. I'm sure everybody on this call has gotten plenty of information about the student groups, sometimes faculty members, sometimes deans, who have come forward to defend the actions of Hamas. And this ties in, interestingly, with the not just the DEI movement, not just with BDS, but with DEI, and the Black Lives Matter Association that has put itself forward as also a defender of Hamas. Right now, we have a public letter circulating. It's not made fully public yet, calling on faculty members, calling on their administrations to take a strong stand against what Hamas is up to, and the justifications of mass murder, rape, kidnapping. This has become, in the eyes of at least the conservative commentariat, and many who are outside the circle of the conservative commentariat, a dividing line in the history of American higher education. That is, things which people like us have been pointing to for a long time as a dire situation in which respect for pursuit of truth, the free expression of ideas, the basic civility that is an essential ingredient of higher education, have gone by the wayside as the riptide of postmodernism has sucked people out to sea, and they think that it's all about power now, and you can say anything anywhere as long as it advances the cause that you are championing. That this has reached so far as to pervert the moral sense of a large number of college students, undergraduates, graduates, and even faculty members, has come as a shock to a lot of people. So we're seeing a movement right now, especially Jewish donors to places like Harvard and University of Pennsylvania who are saying no more. I hope that it doesn't stop with just Jewish donors. This should be something that people of conscience, whatever their faith background is, realize that American higher education has made a terrible turn. We were on this topic early enough that I think we speak with credibility on it. We're not just jumping in because this is a hot moment in the history of the discussion, but that we've been on it for a long time. In fact, we were writing about BDS and the predecessors of the current forms of DEI as long as 10 years ago, and that counts for something. So those are some of the projects that we're on and that we're still on. I think I'll just go from there with some of the programs that we're pursuing. I think it's well known that since 2015 or so, we have been chasing the Chinese Communist Party's infiltration of American college campuses. Initially, we focused on the Confucius Institutes and had considerable success in getting the attention of elected officials and college presidents that this was not a program that could be passed on as benign cultural exchange, that something worse was happening. The loss of intellectual property was one part of it, but the subversion of the values of our colleges and universities was part of it as well. Rochelle Peterson, who did the breakthrough work on this, left NAS a couple of years ago to raise a family. The project has devolved to Ian Oxenod, who has been expanding its reach. Our focus right now is on Confucius classrooms, which are the K-12 version of Confucius Institutes, but it's also led us into a more systematic examination of where funding to American colleges and universities comes when it is connected to hostile foreign governments or their agents. And that in turn has moved us on from just China, although China is by far the biggest player in this mischief, to Qatar, which is, despite its small size, also a pernicious influence on some colleges and universities, and more recently on Iran. And here, again, we've been ahead of the curve. We've been focusing on Iran over the last year or so. It seemed implausible at first that Iran would have any kind of reach into our colleges and universities, but in fact it does, as it's been fairly widely reported that the Biden administration's chief diplomatic representative to Iran has now been basically exposed as a spy, or at least as someone who has been engaged in very dubious cooperation with Iranian authorities. He's been dismissed from his job. The only reason to tell the story is that no sooner was he dismissed from his job than he was hired by Princeton University, which has at least one other figure who has a deep background with the Iranian regime. News has also had it that this figure coordinated the rise of an actual spy ring in Washington, D.C. 5 people have already been arrested in that. So we don't have a report on Iran yet, but we're working on it. So that's another area where we're sort of pursuing our interest in how foreign governments and their agents are getting an undue influence and a free pass on American colleges and universities. Well, why is that so? Well, part of it is ideology, the idea that our universities are meant to be seen as creating citizens of the world, that we are engaged in a process of global education that subordinates any role that universities have in preparing students to be active citizens of this nation. Nationalism itself has a bad odor now in many places, and we are faced thus with a university that is at least tacitly hostile to much of what goes on college campuses that should be fostering the best of what America should be. This element of hostility is furthered by the financial vulnerability of colleges and universities, which is another big topic for NAS. Most colleges and universities in this country draw their sustenance from tuition, and that tuition is set artificially high, backed by federal student loans. This federal student loan fiasco is the topic of another one of our major reports that was written by Neetu Arnold. We're in a crisis over the repayment of loans. That's become something that's battled back and forth between the Biden administration and the US Supreme Court. But we have some say in this too. Every American is being asked to pay the costs of college for the relatively small portion of the public that actually attends college. It's a questionable arrangement, and we're focused on that. In 2011, the Obama administration's Office for Civil Rights, which is part of the Department of Education, issued regulations under Title IX, the law that forbids sex discrimination in higher education, reinterpreting that law as a mandate for essentially doing away with due process for anyone accused of sexual harassment or sexual discrimination on campus. That resulted in a flood of lawsuits of students who believed they were wrongly accused but denied due process on campus. During the Trump administration, the Title IX rules were wrenched back, and through a laborious process, a new set of rules were put in place that attempted to guarantee due process. The Biden administration has now attempted to undo the reforms of the Trump administration. Our Teresa Manning, who works in DC, has been instrumental so far in blockading the Office for Civil Rights return to the status quo ante. They've been putting up these rules, and we've been finding ways to spike the ball. They can't get them passed yet. I don't know how long we'll succeed in doing that, but we've delayed them by at least a year, and that will continue. We don't want to go back to the bad old days in which a mere accusation is enough to destroy the life of a male student or a male faculty member. And the extension of the Title IX regime under the Biden administration is likely to be even worse than what we had in the first go round. So that's another of our projects that we're working on. David Randall will be speaking later at the Wisconsin Association meeting that follows this one, and going into some depth on his projects. David has been a spark plug of legislative reform. His work has produced over 50 model state bills, some of which have already become law in Ohio, among other places. In other situations, his model bills have been remodeled somewhat, but have become the founding block of other legislative efforts to improve what goes on college campuses. There's 50 bills. I don't have time to go through many of them, but the basic driver here is to see what we can do to rid our colleges and universities of their fixation on the diversity, equity, inclusion regime. And instead of taking it on all in one blow, we've broken it down into pieces and gone after them one at a time, which turns out to be a much better recipe for getting legislative cooperation. So we're working on that. David has also drafted his own version of what K-12 civics education should look like in America. And he has founded a group that's subsidiary to NAS called the Civics Coalition, where he's pulled together parent groups and other groups around the country to work on this. The Civics Coalition and his model curriculum are making headway. At least one school in the country in Colorado has adopted his curriculum outright. So we hope that that will be replicated in many other places. But it's useful to have it worked out in at least one instance, since we can then get public debate as to what its strengths and weaknesses actually are. What else do I want to talk about?
MPC.
Sorry?
Is it Minding the Campus maybe? Or
Minding.
AQ's new design, or there's all kinds of fun stuff.
Okay, I have the AQ whisperer here. Our journal, Academic Questions, now in its 37th year, I believe, has a new look to it. It's a larger format. The pages are bigger, the print is bigger, the margins are better. The whole look of it is drastically improved. I say that on the basis of the one issue that has now gone out in this format, which has received dozens of accolades from members who say, finally I can read this thing. But it's pretty too. So I'm very happy with this, and this is all Chance's work. We regained ownership of our own journal a few years ago, and initially under our own ownership, it looked a lot like the old one, but we were taking steps as we went along. We can do things now that Springer, our previous owner, would not allow us to do. And I think the journal is livelier, punchier than it used to be. And we are employing it, I think, as the essential way we get our message out to the members. How big a reach we get beyond our members, I'm not quite clear on, but we do make our articles as widely available as we can. Minding the Campus was a project begun by John Leo when he was working at Manhattan Institute. It was basically a weekly online journal soliciting articles from various people, including me. When John retired from Manhattan Institute, he kept it going as a solo enterprise for a few years. And then he asked me if NAS would take it on. And we did. NAS taking it on meant basically Chance took it on.
Well, David Acevedo ran it for a long-time employee of NAS.
We had a great editor on it who was able to discern what was valuable and what was questionable. And then David Acevedo somehow got the idea that he wanted to be a composer of classical music and has gone on to a PhD program in that field. So we have just hired his replacement, who will start on November 1st.
Yes,
Say
sir.
anything about?
Yes, Minding the Campus, I've been doing my best to publish the occasional article whenever I get the time to go through and edit. But we have just hired Jared Gold, who was the senior editor at Campus Reform, which is a higher education news website that primarily gets its tips and writers from colleges and universities. He's well steeped in most of the controversies of higher education, speaks well, he's a great editor. I think he'll make a fantastic person to follow in David A's footsteps and take the website to where it needs to be, and ideally increase our readership and viewership to a place where the website can hopefully sustain itself without NAS needing to backlog any money or funds to mining the campus.
Right. The difference between mining the campus and academic questions is not just periodicity. Yeah. Academic questions is a carefully put together academic journal that takes a long time between submission and publication. So it's not trying to chase headlines. Minding the Campus is a journal of opinion that we try to make timely, and it follows what's going on. We treat academic questions as something close to the official voice of NAS. It publishes opinions that we don't necessarily endorse, but we certainly think the topics are central and therefore deserve attention. Minding the Campus is looser than that, or we're willing to take on topics that may not be front and center for us, but they're front and center for somebody. And we think that is a place where controversial opinions can and should appear, because they're not going to appear in the Chronicle of Higher Education or Inside Higher Ed and the other mainstream, so to speak, places where academic opinions are spread around. We can publish things that even journals that do take on controversy, like The Hill or Real Clear Education or The Federalist, probably won't touch. And that gives us a niche where we have something to say that's important. So I take pride in that as well. There probably is not a controversial topic in higher education that we have not been involved in at all. In the past, I used to say that the exception was sports, but now Bruce Gilley has put sports into the mix as well. So I think we're pretty much to be found as a full spectrum critic of what's wrong in higher education. The bigger issue that confronts all of us is how being involved in these topics should entail putting forth positive recommendations to how to make things better. That's much harder to do in a world in which the institution of higher education is so deeply corrupted, but we're feeling our way towards being an organization that proposes things that can be done. That's David Randall's forte, but I think we're all sort of aimed at the idea that we earn the right to criticize only if we can come up with ideas about how to make things better. There is a broader discussion that came up at our last virtual board meeting, which I assume will continue amongst members now and for the foreseeable future, which is whether the NAS should be an organization that strives primarily to fix what is broken, or whether we should be an organization that leads the way to something entirely different, a higher education that is not under the control of the establishment such as it is. My self-contradictory answer is that we should do both. And that's, I think it's a disappointment to some. I hear from some members who think they're in the burn it all down school. I have some staff members who are much eager to adopt a rambunctious, let's tear into the fight school. Finding a path that is both fearless in the face of our critics, but also civil and decent and willing to look for what's best in American character is the nature of the enterprise as I see it. So that's publications and programs. Again, I'm open to questions, comments on these matters.
Yeah, I think that's a good place for us to pause the president's report. Again, I think the members meeting has the purpose of sharing information with members about how NS is doing financially as well as programmatically, but also it's a members meeting. So what questions do you have? Any concerns that you have that you would like to share with Peter, with the rest of the group? It'd be very valuable to hear your questions or other thoughts. So let me invite the folks who are on Zoom, if you do have a question, to use the little, what is it, reaction button of raising your hand. It might be hard for Chance to spot you out of the number of people there, but that will put you right to the front if you have a question. And then we can also go to people here in the audience. But it looks like David Nickel has another question there.
Yeah, it's actually not a question. I just wanted to make a comment to Peter Wood. You were talking about the protest on campus for Hamas and against Israel. You might be interested in knowing that here in Columbus, Ohio, which is where I reside, that Les Wexner, well-known billionaire, founder of Victoria's Secrets, has totally disassociated himself with Harvard because there were protests on the Harvard campus pro-Hamas and that kind of thing. Just a comment. I just wanted to share that comment.
Thank you.
I can add that we've been capturing the names of major donors to universities who have resigned or declared that they are no longer going to be supporting their alma maters or favored institutions, and have written to them suggesting that NAS might be a useful ally. So those letters have just gone out yesterday. So, and we will send more out as more people become disaffected. I've already gotten one answer from a person connected with the University of Pennsylvania. So we'll see how this goes.
Great. So again, let's see for a moment if we have any questions here in the room. Yes, please.
I have a question, which is these topics are very broad interest in the broader set of outlets that cover conservative and classical liberal issues. Is there a way of getting the word out to all those publications that our writers can supply them with material on demand?
Just again, you might want to repeat it for the folks.
Is there a way to get the galaxy of other publications that are classically liberal or conservative that they might want to take an interest in what we have to say, our research and publications? Part of the answer to that is that I encourage the staff to write for those publications, and you will frequently find their bylines on almost any publication you can think of, so they know about us. Now, that also results in calls now, at least 3 or 4 a week, from reporters around the country who are seeking our comment on stories. So we do that as well. Nonetheless, I'm sometimes disappointed. I saw a story early this morning that I immediately linked off to Nitu, in which the writer was going on about the foreign funds issues, taking a lot of her material, I think, but not citing her. That disturbs me. I mean, I suppose it's good that we're having that kind of influence, but I'd much rather have our name connected with it as well. So that's are there more ways in which we could promote the brand? Sure, there are, and Chance works on that all the time. We have a fairly expensive consultant who helps us optimize, I think is the word.
Well, I wouldn't call myself the best graphic designer. I have a lot of great ideas. It's the making it happen part that sometimes I fail. So they definitely help out there. AQ is largely a project between the two, me and them. Me kind of putting in these standards that I would like to see, and coming back with a couple of options, and us eventually getting to the place we were. As it comes to publications, though, this year, I think the NAS staff have basically blown it out of the water once more. It's a 35% increase or something in staff publications, at external publications, that is. So
my standard is that I want every staff member to write 1 article a week. Some of them surpass that, some of them don't reach it, but we're in that ballpark.
And when I say that, it's gone up 35%, I'm not saying from like 12 to, 30 or something, but from closer to 200 or 300 to, 400 or 500. So it's been good.
Were there any other questions in the chat, Chance, that
There
address?
were, right here, it was considering the recent turmoil in some prestigious universities, we should probably intensify multicultural events for high school students. Okay, I'm gonna let that one stand, but the second one, I definitely appreciate unless you want to go for that first.
No,
one.
I mean, just on the question of high school students, that's always been a hard line for NAS to walk. Our focus is higher education, but higher education, of course, is downstream from secondary education, elementary education. So that's where David Randall's work and the Civics Alliance has been very, very powerful.
Yes.
But again, we have to shepherd our resources too, and K through 12 is just an enormous black hole that we could pour those into. So, but what was the other?
The other question is, what about we try to targeted increase of indexing at academic questions? And I agree with that question. That is something that we are constantly trying to do. There's different indexing companies out there, and sometimes they reach out to us, sometimes we reach out to them, and try and get AQ placed so that it's available on those sites and services.
Okay. Any other questions from, again, either folks on Zoom, raise your hands, or any others in the audience here today, or any other comments? Again, this is an opportunity for Peter and members of the staff to hear comments from members as well. All right. Well, so what I would ask for then is, as we come to the end of our members meeting, for a motion to adjourn the annual members meeting before we turn to the affiliate meeting.
Motion to adjourn.
So Bruce, motion, a second, please. Yes. All right, all in favor? Aye. Any opposed? No. So we shall adjourn this year's member meeting. So thank you so much. But don't go, because we're now going to turn it over to Benjamin Whitcomb of the Wisconsin Association of Scholars, where they really put together a great lineup for us as well. So thank you so much. I'll hand it over to Benjamin.
Thank you. All right, let's hold that up for you here. So you just jump right in.
Yes.
Pardon me.
Hi, everybody. We'll actually take a 5-minute break for a setting up the technology for one of the speakers. We'll be back in 5.
Okay. 5 minutes, y'all. We'll see you back here.
Well,
Looking forward to it.
And how is the members?
Thank you all. All right, just as a reminder, my name is Benjamin Whitcomb. I'm the president of the Wisconsin Association of Scholars. And this is our fourth semi-annual symposium. And we're so delighted that it worked out to have it in conjunction with the NAS, our parent organization's membership meeting, annual membership meeting. So we have 5 speakers lined up, and the person who's going to introduce the first speaker is our state treasurer, Brian Wolfman, who has been a longtime NAS member and has worked at Medical College of Wisconsin for the past 20 years, and was only too happy to put together our spring symposium this past May at Medical College of Wisconsin, the results of which got more publicity than we really could have imagined. And I'll let Brian explain further from there. Brian?
Thanks, Benjamin. The last time we met, as Benjamin just said, it was under interesting circumstances. We held our spring symposium via Zoom. And that was because the Medical College of Wisconsin president, John Raymond, canceled our room reservation that I had made about 6 months prior to the event. Now, his account of what happened and why is a different story from the one that I would tell you, but I'll spare you the details. The important thing, I think, is that Peter Wood and I had dinner with John Raymond last night, and it was a great conversation. And we all, John Raymond and I, agree on at least one, I think the most important thing, which is that the MCW faculty and staff and students include a significant fraction who launched an internal pressure campaign that ultimately gathered well over 1,000 signatures that was presented to John Raymond in order to urge him to deplatform our panel and our speakers, which was set to include U.S. Senator Ron Johnson, Wisconsin State Rep Dave Murphy, and National Association of Scholars Director of University Policy John Seiler, to discuss in a panel DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion in medicine and the sciences, uses and abuses. And it was simply the topic of our symposium that enraged some of my colleagues enough to work to have us deplatformed. And that was initially, I think, for us a disappointment and a bad thing. But several good things have come out of it. Ultimately, we were able to hold our meeting with the panelists, have a great, I think, set of presentations and discussions at a secret nearby off-campus location, live streamed it via Zoom to an audience of well over 100 attendees, which I think is larger than we've had for our other events. So I think we reached a larger audience. And that presentation was recorded and it's available online now. So if you go to our Wisconsin Association of Scholars website, which is wisnas.org, WISNAS.org, and go click on the link to our blog page, you'll find an entry that has embedded in it a link to the video recording. And you can see all of the ostensibly divisive or otherwise bad things that we wanted to present to an audience on the medical college campus. Now, amazingly, the news of the cancellation spread quickly. Local talk radio in Wisconsin, several different social media channels, and earned MCW a number of letters of concern from free speech organizations like FIRE, FAIR, even PEN America, which, if you're familiar with it, wouldn't probably be someone normally in our corner. Are there any tech issues?
Making sure it's streaming.
Okay. Now, the second good thing I think that happened was that John Raymond, in the immediate aftermath of the cancellation, expressed in an email to the campus community his dismay over what had happened. And he professed his personal support for having a culture that values free expression on our campus. He also announced the formation of 2 new committees that he commissioned personally to prevent this sort of thing from happening again, and to start building a culture of academic freedom and free speech at MCW, including written expressions of principles where none currently exist, using the Chicago principles as a guide. Dr. Raymond and I have now had a series of one-on-one meetings, and over the course of the last few months, he's convinced me that those statements that he's made, which are fairly modest, I think, in their ambition, are sincere, and that he really does desire to change MCW's intolerant leftist culture. Now, another good thing that came out of this is that as the protest movement was building on campus, actually completely unknown to me, they kept it pretty quiet. This prompted one courageous MCW medical student to write a letter to Representative Murphy, detailing his own personal experiences with what he termed a climate that seeks to stifle debate and discussion, and that presents only left-wing orthodoxy. I'm delighted to introduce that student as our next speaker. Daniel Hughes has a long history of scholarship. He was an undergraduate at Harvard, studied history and literature, later earned a law degree at Georgetown, then did a post-bac at Hunter College in New York to get together the necessary prerequisites to allow him to pursue a medical degree, and he's now a medical student at MCW. One postscript before I turn the podium over to Dan is that in my first meeting with John Raymond in June, I asked him if he would share with me the petition and the list of all the signatures that were obtained and presented to him. And he said that he would if he possibly could. I thought that meant I would never see it. But the next day, I got an email from him with that complete document. And as he said, there were over 1,000 signatures on this collected, names and signatures dated, all recorded. And, you know, I was interested in scanning through it to see which of my colleagues were named and which ones weren't. And as I went through it, I was shocked. This was, I think, pretty late one night to find M. Daniel Hughes and his signature listed in as one of the signers of the petition, which startled me. And ultimately, I sent him a note and asked if he had signed this petition. And his reply seemed to me a little indignant. Like, why would I be asking him this? He's already made clear his position. So I sent him a screen grab with his signature, and ultimately he recognized that someone had fraudulently attached his name. And he can tell you more if he wants to about how that's working its way through MCW's disciplinary system. But I just thought it was a pretty astonishing and brazen example of how little regard our ideological opponents on questions of free expression and open viewpoint discussions really have, how little respect they have for basic principles of truth and honesty. So with that, I'm really happy to welcome, after meeting him a moment ago for the first time in person, Daniel Hughes, my MCW colleague, to tell you about his experiences.
And really, your student, I somehow survived molecules to cells. So thank God for pass-fail grading. I'm not going to be a biochemist by training, I don't think. But thank you so much to Professor Brian Volkman for the invite. I do want to say at the outset, as I have been warned many times by my institution, that I am speaking not for the Medical College of Wisconsin entirely in the capacity of my own personal opinion. Yes, so I'm an M3 student at the medical school. Everybody always looks at me as like, you're so old, how does that work? But I think Brian kind of explained, I had a lot of adventures along the way to getting here, including being an attorney. I worked in New York, primarily in bankruptcy and financial restructuring for several years. So I was just going to walk through a few of the points you touched on. And I know we don't have a lot of time, but I'm also happy if anyone has any questions or want to go a different direction. So I think leading up to the event, I always sort of like to play devil's advocate or think about, what's the alternative position. And I found the run up to the cancellation of your event very strange. And then I found the cancellation even stranger when Dr. John Raymond said, quote, "To be clear, this rescission is not due to the topic or the viewpoints of the speakers." And one of the reasons I thought that was very strange is some of the things that I had encountered that far at MCW. And I'm also going to give a couple examples from this year that have happened subsequently. So we often have speakers presented to us where it is abundantly clear that the whole point is for us to actively demonstrate compliance. And by actively, I mean that a little ironically, because you're sort of supposed to be quiet or just sort of validate what they're saying. So, if this is a lecture about biochemistry, I don't know, maybe that's okay. But we've had some fairly out there lectures. So one that we recently had, and I don't want to take a snarky tone about this thing. I think the people who want to make these arguments should make them, put them out in the public square. But we've had several that are about medicine and race. And generally, the upshot is always that all differences in outcomes have to do with discrimination. And so that, for instance, if we look at a patient who is African American and we think that patient might be more likely to have sickle cell anemia because of a vaso-occlusive crisis or similar, that is essentially systemic racism. We are embodying systemic racism by in any way using race as any kind of a proxy for anything possibly much more complex, but that sort of behavior is foundationally racist. Meanwhile, I should say we're taught these syndromes and these conditions sort of in a way that's correlated to race. So this is very confusing as a student because you sort of learn, only Asian women get Takayasu arthritis. Yet if you think that, you're a racist. So you were sort of supposed to cough up several times these kind of reflections where you're sort of supposed to validate these opinions that sometimes were articulated by non-scientists, hard to even follow. So that whole sort of like game of stuff with that had seemed really odd to me. I also had, for example, recently a lecture in pediatrics, and it was on pediatrics and climate change. And incidentally, not that it really matters. I think there probably is human-generated climate change. But this lecture was basically saying that all pediatricians should take clinical time during their encounters with all families to educate them about climate change. So, that's like a pretty debatable opinion, right? Some people might be all for that and some people might be against it and some people make decisions about their clinicians about that. But again, it was absolutely clear that at that very out there, very kind of at the forefront of the left kind of opinion, the only possible opinion that would be acceptable would be validation, right? You got to validate the speaker. If you have any sort of doubts, you better be quiet. And so I had this experience with several other things. We just, on the anniversary of Dobbs, the Kern Institute, which is dedicated to character and caring, which I would say is actually often devoted to bringing forth left-wing outcomes under various guises, ran a special on abortion. It had 5 editorials that were all by very pro-choice people. Meanwhile, at our school, we have a medical students for life. As a faculty advisor, they didn't ask them for any of their points of view. They didn't ask for any counter opinions. So we see like thing after thing after thing, where there's like these programmatic, and again, I should just say as a caveat, I think all of these things, abortion, climate change, race and medicine, are very complex topics. And I invite people to have diverse opinions on them. But it seemed very strange to me that while like on all of these issues, we were supposed to have these sort of programmatic presentations where we needed to validate what was being said of the speaker, all of a sudden there was this symposium and something was, very different about it, right? And it absolutely couldn't be held, couldn't be discussed, shouldn't be allowed on campus. And I will also say, I mean, in some of the lead up, I was in some virtual meetings that I think maybe Brian was not. I mean, the depiction of this group here in the room was absolutely that they were coming like to burn crosses and do, to do a lynching. I mean, and including by some senior administrators at the school. I mean, I pushed back really hard against this. I said, you might really disagree with these viewpoints. You might disagree with what Chancellor says. You might think DEI initiatives are great, but the way that this is being portrayed internally was extraordinary, to be perfectly honest. Because I mean, it literally was, just portrayed in the most extreme fashion. And also, I do have to say, still to this moment, some of the things that my fellow students had to say at those meetings were extraordinary. So one person got up and said that if you were to have met at MCW in May, it would threaten her ideological safety. So to which I said, I mean, if you want ideological safety, there's a couple of places you should definitely consider. Cuba, North Korea, Iran. There's a lot of ideological safety in those places, but we don't, I mean, the concept is so foundationally opposed to any system of freedom of expression. Anyway, I think you get my main points. I think there is a crisis in medicine, quite frankly. I think there needs to be less hierarchy. I think there needs to be a lot more airing of different points of view. I think this new sort of AMA and AAMC orthodoxy is not a good idea. And I guess when I look at these issues, I mean, something that I point to all the time is, if someone would make the argument, look, how doctors do stuff, and then this sort of very left-wing culture that's emerged, it's getting the most amazing outcomes ever. We are winning the war on cancer, diabetes, whatever. Well, the reality is the exact opposite is true, right? So life expectancy in the United States is falling. It's fallen more in the last 5 years than any period since right before the Great Depression. Pew Research Center shows declining trust in scientists, declining trust in medical scientists, and so on. So there are things that are going on that are not working. So I think it is foundationally really important that we have as much freedom of expression as possible at MCW and beyond. And I guess I'm gonna throw out one anecdote and then talk about a couple remedies, and then I'll be quiet or if there's a question. So I threw out this anecdote when I spoke to the Wisconsin legislature in May, and I really do mean it. One of the finest doctors who I shadowed before I came to medical school had trained at the University of Jena in what was then East Germany in the late 1980s. And he talked about how, so when the Berlin Wall came down in November 1989, the group of doctors that he was training with had to go to Marxism-Leninism seminar every Friday morning. So the week that it came down, they were like, so do we still have to go or not? Or, what's up? And it turned out they actually did go. I mean, for about another month, and then the seminars ceased, and there were some other academic changes that happened. But I think, quite frankly, before this episode happened, I mean, there was really an element not so different than that at MCW. We are given all these assignments where we're supposed to write reflections. It's exactly true what your reflection is supposed to be, which is to be compliant with some kind of left-wing opinion that itself is often totally contradictory, like what I outlined about, some of the things we hear about ethnicity in medicine or race in medicine. And it's also kind of clear that if you don't toe the line, there could be consequences for you. And so as I said, I don't think that's a good way for us to position ourselves as scholars. And I don't think, given the crises that we currently have in medicine, it's a great way to approach our relationships with our patients. So just various things going on with me, going on with the school. So as Brian talked about, we have a new committee on freedom of expression. So which I am on. So I have been co-opted. So if I come back in a year, maybe I'll give you the MCW party line. I don't know, but that was an interesting process. So over 60 people applied. They picked 2 MD students and 1 MD PhD. You had to write like 5 essays, literally, where you sort of showed that you could see all these different sides of all these issues that could come up. But we had our first meeting 2 weeks ago. We are meeting 25 times in the next 11 months. So I think it's a very genuine effort, kind of like what Brian was saying, but by Dr. Raymond. I think we're going to come up with some really interesting ideas. We're talking a lot broadly about, styles of communication, what freedom of expression can mean. And I think, there's some interesting, recent developments that maybe bring some of these issues into light. Obviously, there's been a lot of controversy on both sides about recent sort of Israeli Hamas or Israeli Palestinian campus debates where, different sides feel very vigorously that they should have freedom of expression. So I think it's going to be interesting. I think that issue could potentially frame how important it is to have freedom of expression on campus. And it's interesting too, just in the beginnings of our deliberations with our Committee on Freedom of Expression, the public universities are held to, a very high standard because the First Amendment is now directly applicable post the post-Civil War amendments that make that directly applicable to the states. And it's interesting to me, in California, they have something called the Leonard Law that was first authorized in the 90s, and then it was reauthorized in the aughts, and basically applies all of the federal protections and federal obligations that you would have at public universities in California to the private universities. And I guess as I've sort of thought about this and talked to the legislature, I think that is a really interesting solution. If people are going to sort of put their efforts behind some effort to have more freedom of expression on a consistent basis at a place like MCW, I do think there's a lot of leverage there. I am excited for our committee and our work, and I think there's some other people on it that feel very strongly, as I do, that we need a robust commitment to freedom of expression. The problem is that basically operates at the whim of the institution, right? Because there's just so many more restrictions on freedom of expression that can be placed at a private institution. So thank you very much for giving me an opportunity to, I just actually was gonna say real quick. Yeah, so that just since Brian brought it up, really quick. So yeah, somebody forged my name on that petition, that clever person. And the person was so clever that the public safety and the general counsel of the school, as I said, apparently I think I've been co-opted now, we were able to use metadata to find out who he was. And I guess one thing that I thought was really weird about this, I don't know if some of you have had similar experiences, I had never spoken to him. And the name that his name is it's not a Western name. And when I first saw the name, I was like, oh, I don't even know her. Like, I didn't even recognize the gender of the person with the name, let alone had never met this person. But apparently I occupy more headspace in this person's head than he does in mine. So yeah, he thought it would be a fun idea to, do me dirty and falsify my signature on the petition. And anyway, I hope that, he learned some lessons. He's currently having some disciplinary actions taken against him. But I wish that guy the best of luck. I hope he becomes a great doctor. I find it really weird that that's what you're spending your time doing in medical school, is forging people's names on petitions. But, I don't know, hopefully he'll learn a lesson. I don't really believe in coerced apologies at all. He was, told he had to apologize to me. So he wrote me a very inauthentic letter that I responded to, and he did not respond to. But, best of luck. But we did, in fact, you got to be careful what you do. Metadata can track you down on these. It was on a Qualtrics platform. So
if we don't know his name, how can we avoid him?
That's a good point.
We have maybe a couple of minutes if anyone wants to. So someone's asked Ben if they can't find the recording of it on the symposiums, on the WISNAS site. Is it there?
Under blogs.
Under blogs. Okay. So if you're looking for it, wisnas.org, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. So it should be under blogs. And I guess we have a couple of minutes for questions. I don't know, Ben, if you want to.
Are there any in the chat there?
If you'd like to raise a question, we have a couple of minutes. You could put it in the chat.
Any from?
I would like to ask you a question as a lawyer.
Sure.
Not that I'm a lawyer, you're a lawyer. Do people who do things like this, like forge signatures, do they have any right to privacy? Tell us what this person's name is. And related to that, these people who break up these meetings, being very obstreperous, like that famous case where they silenced the federal judge Stanford Law.
Sure.
Do those people have any right to privacy? All of those names should be published and made public.
Yeah,
My-
yeah, that's an interesting question. I don't, I mean, generally, I'm not an expert at all in privacy law. If you're deemed a public figure, you obviously have much less right to privacy. I don't know that he would really have a right to privacy. I mean, I don't want to expose him to further whatever. But it just is, yeah, I mean, it's interesting, right? It's interesting. I mean, you're seeing it play out right now a lot with some of the recent things with the Israeli Hamas issue about, releasing people's names or not releasing names and all of that. Yeah, I mean, I appreciate if you want to give me your name and you meet any new doctors in 5 or 6 years and want me to tell you that it is not this individual, I will be happy to provide you on a case by case information with that.
All these pro-Hamas demonstrations, so many of these people wear masks, because of COVID bullshit.
Right.
They're like the Klan, they're always masked, And I don't see why they're entitled to that kind of privacy. I think every person who participates in such a demonstration the name should be made public, or that they should be made public. Is there any law preventing it?
I'd love to know the answer to that question. When I asked John Raymond about all the signers of the petition, and I asked if he was going to release it or publish it, and he said, well, I personally think that those people put their name on that list and they should own it. But he then said, but my general counsel's office advised me that wouldn't be a wise thing to do. But that's different from determining what protections those people have and what liability.
Why would that be not a wise thing to do?
Well, we have to move on. We have to move on.
I just had one question actually for you as a lawyer and soon to be doctor and as a member of this committee on free speech. NAS is usually pretty careful to distinguish free speech writ large from academic freedom in terms of research, especially from freedom in the classroom to teach or to learn, all having overlapping but different spheres. And especially for a medical school, when you look at the subject of free speech, either in kind of public forums or more importantly, the classroom, do you have thoughts on what the limits might be there? And I'm thinking of, situations as a doctor, like as we saw many instances, say in California, like where doctors are being disciplined about not supporting or sharing alternative treatments around COVID and the like. So it's a place where it's certainly not simple. And I guess I wonder, having that very unique background that you have thoughts on that?
Yeah, I do. Kind of briefly. I have a very particular relationship with the general counsel at our school, because sometimes they're telling me what to do. Sometimes they're helping me find perps. Sometimes we just talk and we're friends. So we have a very complex kind of a relationship. The general counsel's office came to our first meeting of the Committee on Freedom of Expression and gave a presentation on precisely the distinction that you just mentioned between freedom of speech, free expression, and then academic freedom. And I agree with you 100% that there's a lot of differences between the terms and where they apply. And academic freedom doesn't really have much legal standing, but it has a lot of other ways it's important. Anyway, so I think that's super important. I think that, to me, and also this is, intimately how I have understood it. And I think something that we're beginning to think about, we've only had meeting 1 of 25, but is that we want to think a lot about different domains in medicine. And I guess I'm thinking about things primarily as a student, just because I am. Because what I think is, this is my conjecture, and I get a lot of pushback from a lot of people, and so I welcome that, in people's conversation or whatever. I think part of the problem at MCW is sometimes that attending physicians who are teaching us are really afraid what could ever happen in front of a patient in a clinical encounter. And so that's a very low level of freedom of expression that's going to be allowed in a clinical encounter, right? I think it would be totally inappropriate if I just got off of inpatient psych at the VA. If I, chimed into the patient, well, your psychiatrist has just said that, but I'm an M3 and actually I read this article and, right. So, I mean, I think, especially in an inpatient locked psychiatric ward, I think that would probably not be conducive to patient wellness on the whole. But the problem is we really need like a very different standard for what could potentially happen in the classroom. And we probably need a different standard again for what you can do in public forums and also what kind of events can be hosted at school. And I think it's really tricky, and MCW has like 4 competing missions, and I won't go into them, but the clinical one probably demands a lot of restriction on freedom of expression. We have a huge issue too right now with a lot of residents will wear if it's a left of center thing, you can wear it, right? So if it says Black Lives Matter, you can wear it. If it says ask me my pronouns, you can wear it. But if it says like Ron Johnson, like I voted for Ron Johnson or something, right, you can't wear it. So there's already kind of like a debate over what is allowed or not allowed in those spaces. And to me, I think that there's you need very different standards across these different domains, even within the same group of institutions. But I also think, and I thought this as this unfolded, I think that we as students and faculty as well need explicit instruction on why, how, all of those things, because that's something that has astounded me as a person. I'm just short of 45, so I'm about 20 years and older than most people in my class. A lot of my fellow students have no concept of the Constitution, freedom of speech, freedom of expression. It's been really foreign to their education. The educational system has shifted so far toward compliance that I think people have to be educated that that's not the only sort of point of view.
So I'm
Gotta
very
go.
much enjoying it, Daniel.
Sorry.
Thank you so
Thank you.
much. All right, excellent. But with this lineup of speakers and working everybody in the time that we have, I'm delighted to introduce our next speaker, Professor Duke Pesta from University of Wisconsin-Oshkosh, English professor and prolific writer and speaker who has also written for Academic Questions and is going to talk to us about civic illiteracy in universities.
Thank you.
Welcome, Dr. Pesta.
And just so I know, what time do we, is this?
If you're wrapped up by 55.
Okay, that's good.
Great.
Okay, all right, I can do that, assuming I can get this. Okay, so everybody you can all see me on the camera, the Zoom, I hope. Can somebody wave if you, oh, good. You can, all right. So let's see. Okay. Seem to be frozen on the screen here.
There you go.
Okay, so just one step back. Okay, so when I was a graduate student at Purdue University in the mid-90s, 1990s, I knew this day was coming. I'm a Renaissance scholar, Shakespearean, and my first graduate course, I was all excited to take a Shakespeare class, but it turned out to be Shakespeare and feminism. We didn't really talk about Shakespeare. My next semester, I want to take a seminar on Milton, the great Christian poet, and it was Milton and Marxism. And my first question was, Marx was born 120 years after Milton, so why am I doing this? And that didn't go over very well, compliance, right? So I knew this day was coming, and I knew I had to take a guess, right? Can I make it to the end of my career or drop the PhD? I foolishly got the PhD. Because it's gotten really bad really quick. And so one thing that I did early in the mid-90s when I started teaching as a grad student is passing out survey quizzes, the first thing I did in class. Believe it or not, I did for 16 years in 5 different universities. In fact, let's go back here, I can show you. I'll skip that real quick for just the sake of time. These are the schools I taught at before I stopped giving these surveys a little bit before. And this is, and I have to look here. Something's not right.
Share, right?
Yeah, how do I get out of this? Because I can't really see what's there. Sorry about this. I'm an Apple guy and they got me on a regular platform here. Can we get out of where's the?
Yeah, I know. Here it is.
And you want to be sharing, right?
Yeah. And the number 2, yep, that's it.
Yeah.
Okay, and that should, and then, okay, I think that's it, all right. So here's the background. I gave these, I call them civic literacy surveys for about 16, 17 years from 5 different universities: Purdue, University of Tennessee at Martin, Ursinus College, Oklahoma State University, and now the University of Wisconsin. And I administered more than 3,000 of these things over my career. It's pretty stunning. I didn't keep all the paperwork, but every semester I dutifully documented them. And so I want to share some of this with you. Okay. Now it's not advancing. I'm sorry. How do you do that? Okay. And there's
the slide thing. No. Down here.
Just hit what?
Just tap.
Just tap it? Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So this is my first question, and I did not change these questions over 16 years. Excluding the United States, name one slaveholding nation or people over the last 2,500 years. 83% of my kids, 2,850 students. Now I got to preface this. This is half of these students are English majors. So being obtuse and ignorant is a little skewed. I can say that as an English professor, right? So they're going to be a little bit more radical, I think, than most kids. But nevertheless, it's a stunning number to me. I had Orthodox Jewish kids in some of my classes. I had evangelical Christians in some of my classes. Still, they couldn't even come up with Moses and Pharaoh. Pretty stunning. And to me, this explains why, for the first time since the 1960s, you've got college kids in groups like Antifa and Black Lives Matter, looting and burning and assaulting. Because if we had the education these kids are getting, even before they get to college now, I think we would hate our country too. If you believed that slavery was a uniquely American problem, then this is the culture that has to be changed, right? And so moving forward a little bit. So I asked them to circle all the following that served as presidents of the United States, right? Franklin Jefferson, Paul Revere, and Alexander Hamilton, and this is the response. 63% only figured out that Thomas Jefferson was a president. They thought Franklin was 60% of the time, Hamilton 51, but this is the one, and Paul Revere 32 times. And the funny thing about this is I had multiple cases where out of classes of 32, 35, 38 kids, only 3 students actually realized he was a president. So it's pretty stunning, right? And the thing that is, again, well, we can go further here a little bit. This is the one we look at next with regards to Jefferson. This is one of my favorites. I asked the following questions. Was he a general? All that are true. He was a general in the Revolutionary War. He defeated Lee at the Battle of Gettysburg. He wrote you laugh until you see the answers. He wrote the Declaration of Independence. He owned slaves, and he was president of the United States. And this is what we get. 63%, again, that makes sense, identified him as a president, but 64% actually identified him as a Revolutionary War general. Even 29% thought he was a Civil War general. And then this one blew me away. 95% of these kids knew he owned slaves. The only thing that he really knew is that he was a slave owner. Again, if you're going to get the Constitution thrown out, you've got to convince them, right? That Thomas Jefferson was the first slaveholder in the world, that the Constitution is a document about slavery. And this kind of level of ignorance really does this. And I'm glad we're talking about this because Mr. Randall, you guys have done great jobs in this organization trying to focus on civics. And then there's this.
What percentage got that he wrote the Declaration?
Oh, did I not have it on there?
Yeah, I don't think I saw it.
I don't know if I can go forward. We'll come back to it.
Okay.
I will, sorry about that. So what form of government, I asked this question, what form of government did the founding fathers institute in the country? Democracy, constitutional republic, bicameral government, a modified monarchy, and an oligarchy. And these were the answers. 58% of my students thought that we were a democracy, a circled democracy. Only 31% circled constitutional republic. That's probably better than my professor colleagues would do, but not great. 7% bicameral, 3% a modified monarchy, and 1% an oligarchy. And I guarantee you that would have been much higher if they knew what the word meant, but they didn't. And again, this is small liberal arts college, big research campuses, branch campuses, pretty much everything you can imagine, all across the East, Midwest and South Midwest, right? So there's a whole different bunch of schools. Then I asked this one, according to the Constitution, who should have the most control in our government? The president, the Senate, the people, the government, and the states. And this is how this one played out. 68% said the president, 12% said the Senate, 8% the government. I had to explain that one to afterwards. They didn't get the irony there. 8% the people, and 4% the states. This is a dangerous, dangerous thing, right? When we think about this. And the funny thing, 30 years ago, parents would bring up kids in places like Lake Geneva, Wisconsin, and those kids would be religious, they would be patriotic, they would be normal kids. Then when they got to UW-Madison after the first semester, they come back home from Thanksgiving break and they're lecturing you about how Thanksgiving hates Indians, right? Now, with certain reforms over the last 30 years in the public schools, these kids are now coming to college pre-baked. We don't even have to move them anymore. They're there. And that's why they're now more radical than the teachers. And I think the professors don't know how to handle this, right? Including the president of your college, right? I think he thought he was doing the one thing he wouldn't get in trouble for, which is protecting the radical left, but blew up on him, right? And that's part of the bubble. Ask this one. Circle each in our country who are responsible for creating laws. Supreme Court, the Parliament, the President, the Congress, or the Bureau of Law. Yeah. So 90% said the Supreme Court. Yeah, 90. I didn't include another one where I asked them at the time, at different times, to name a Supreme Court justice. That changed over the times. I adapted them for that. And usually you can get one. 1 out of 9 is all they could do. So 90% circled the Supreme Court. 65, the President. 49, Congress. 23, the Parliament, and 18 actually decided the Bureau of Law did that. But that, again, explains a lot, right? You think about the activists, these kids, why they're so mad, why they're picketing Amy Barrett's house, because this is what they think. Let me go a little bit further here. Circle each of the following guarantees in the First Amendment with regard to religion: separation of church and state, prohibition of atheism, the freedom to exercise religion, and of course, the removal of all religion from schools. This is the response here. 91% believe that the separation of church and state is in the First Amendment. Unbelievable. 65% believed the removal of religion from schools is in the First Amendment. 47% circled the prohibition of atheism, and 43% only circled the freedom to exercise religion. And so now we see what's happening to religion and the hostility to this on college campuses. I point out to my students all the time, 90% of the world's cultures from the beginning of time believed in some sort of a God, but talking about God as an idea is almost completely not possible at a university anymore. This is another one. In the Bill of Rights, which of the 10 amendments to the Constitution specifically insists that it shall not be infringed? Social right to social welfare, to happiness, to liberty, to a free press, or to bear arms. And we get this 54% social welfare, right? 14% happiness. Students circled free press 12% of the time, 11% of the time liberty, and way there down at the bottom, 9% only of almost 3,000 students at over 16 years all across the country, only 9% recognized that that was the Second Amendment. In one sentence, I asked them to define capitalism. Almost 80% defined capitalism by using the words greedy, selfish, or unfair, or related variance. That's 8 out of 10. I saw a poll a couple months ago. 74, if it was, I don't know how accurate it was, I don't remember which one it was, but the poll found that 74% of people between the ages of 18 and 24 would immediately change the culture to a socialist system if they had the opportunity to do it. And this is fairly in line with that. And then you get the opposite, right? In one sentence, define socialism. 87% use the words fairness, equality, or in the most recent few years, equity, over and over again. And it really does tend to show us where we are with this. And so So that's the survey. There's a lot, there were 10 other, I gave you 10, there were 10 other questions and they were equally depressing. And so from time wise, so my perspective on this is when I'm trying to relate to these kids, the reason I do this, when they're signing up for Shakespeare, they're signing up for my classes, I do this first because it gives me not just information about them, but it also then allows me to give a little bit of time the next time I see them to use this as a heuristic to talk to them about, okay, this is what I'm going to try to teach you. This is what you think you know. And it really does work because our kids are radicalized, but they're not stupid, nor are they insensitive. And so if you can start from a level like this and begin to try to walk back to ask them questions, right? Why do you think you're wrong about this? Where did you get this information for? Or what led you to believe that these things were true? Inevitably, it comes back to the same thing. Well, this is what our teachers told us. And teachers at every level, across middle school and high school, even elementary school, other college professors were telling them these same things. And so it becomes a real exercise in agitprop. This is what education has become. And I see this at the university I've taught at. In fact, the reason I've been at 7 different universities, because when they found out I was a conservative, it didn't help me that I was a Christian as well. I was told by I was coming up for tenure at Oklahoma State University. And the same department chair who 2 years before tenure, she said to me, called me into her office and said, "Did you just publish an article in Academic Questions?" And I said, "Yeah, did you read it?" I was still very young. And she said, "Do not ever do it again. You have embarrassed your colleagues. Don't do it again," she said. So I did it the next year, or a year and a half later. At which time, when I came up for tenure, she called me into her office and she said, "Now listen, Dr. Duke," she says, "you probably have enough to get tenure, but I will not support you. I know that the committee will not support you either. So if I were you, I would look for other jobs." Right. And so I did, and I found one. And we ended up moving to Wisconsin. And at Wisconsin, when I was coming up for the tenured person who was overseeing my case to make the tenure recommendation, she told me afterwards that even though I had enough articles to get tenure, one of them was Academic Questions. And there was a 45-minute debate in the room if we should count it. Because if we didn't count it, we would be closer to not being able to give him tenure, right? And so I knew that was going to happen. So before she went into the committee, I gave her about 4 pages about Academic Questions and who the NAS was. And so she did her homework. Now she's not a radical liberal, but she's a fair-minded Democrat. So I armed her with that. So when they started attacking this, she pulled out this stuff and started passing it around. The department chair, who really wanted to see me untenured, afterwards she had to tip her hat to the woman who helped me. She said, "You did a good job. I'll never forgive you for doing it," she said, but you did a good job. You made it impossible for us to deny him tenure. There's 7 different universities. That little place I was at, Ursinus College. I was there. I was hired. This is an interesting story, real quick. It's 900 students in Philadelphia, surrounded by a lot of better known liberal arts colleges. And so when I was hired at Ursinus College in 2000, they told me there was an English department of about 5 people, right? 900, about 50, 60 majors. They said, "We don't know what to make of it, Dr. Pesta, because all our kids only want to read minority literature. They want to learn all about Black lives, and they want to learn about Indian literature. And none of our classes make in the classics. Nobody wants to read Shakespeare or the Bible or Milton. So we need somebody to perk those up," right? So silly me, I actually took them seriously and started teaching the classics. And in about a year and a half, suddenly my classes were overflowing. It had nothing to do with me. It was everything to do with the subject. Now, these kids were desperately interested in something other than identity politics. Because, I mean, it's the same approach, whether you're teaching Hispanic or Black or LGBTQ or Native American culture. It's all about your victims by these dudes, right? It's the same class. So after about a year and a half, I was called into the president of the college's office in November. He said, "So here's the problem. The other 5 colleagues don't like you. They don't like the way you think. And they have tenure, you don't. So in May, you're fired. He said, I'll let you teach through May. He also told me, if you breathe a word of this to anyone, you will be fired on the spot. Being naive, I decided for about 3 weeks, I didn't say a word to word. I was like, what am I going to do? Then I got wise and called a lawyer. Right? And the lawyer opened up the faculty handbook and says, here are 14 things they did to violate their own contract. It was very touching. It's actually, if you can find it, I was on the front page of the Philadelphia, is it Examiner? What is it called? Thank you, the Inquirer. Back in 2002 when they fired me. And in a school with 900 kids in it, my lawyer was banned from campus. So he couldn't talk to anybody involved. So the kids, these 870 of those 900 kids, most of them I'd never have in class, they organized a caravan of vehicles to drive the college kids 4 miles down the road to a local Hilton, where my lawyer got a big room like this, and 870 of them showed up. And the first thing my lawyer said when he stood up, he said, look, I deal with university professors. 99 times out of 100, I represent professors who've done bad things. This professor has done nothing wrong. And it was very touching. They chalked the whole campus up. They did all these things. And anyway, what ended up happening is that the university actually conceded. I was in a bad spot because if I had 2 more years for tenure was coming up in 2 years. Do I go back there and let them find a reason to? So I took 2 years of salary plus 4 years of medical benefits to go find another job, which I did. And so this is the problem for me. You know, we're in a situation, and we're just about at time, but we're in a situation now where, as you were pointing out, it's gone so left. The idea of equality, the idea of free speech, the idea that other lives, other opinions matter, it's gone. And this is at every university I've been at, it's just gone. And so I want to end by thanking sincerely, and I intend to join the national and the local group. So don't let me get out of here without doing that, because I owe it to you, and I want to be a part of that. But you guys have published articles for me that has done 2 things: help me get tenure and to really piss them off. So I tip my hat to you, and thank you for letting me speak today.
Thank you, Dr. All right, next, a brief legislative update from our Vice President of the Wisconsin Association of Scholars, Bob Fiedler. Bob?
Thank you, Benjamin. We've got quite a political situation in Wisconsin. Some of you are familiar with it. Maybe the broader audience is not. We have split government. We have a Democratic governor who's rather liberal and a conservative legislature, and they're at knockerheads with each other. So just in short, I'm so honored to serve with Duke Pesta on a group called the Free Speech for Campus. The Free Speech for Campus, the Washington Association of Scholars, and another group, the Wisconsin Institute for Law and Liberty, have been in the forefront of free speech and trying to add common sense to application of DEI principles. But one person who's very key to it is the Speaker of our Assembly, Robin Vos. Just 3 things he's done. One, he took away $32 million 3 months ago from the University of Wisconsin system, so you can't use it on DEI. 2, some people may not agree with what I'm going to say next, but he held up $70 million in pay increases for our faculty at the University of Wisconsin universities. And 3, he's holding up $250 million on a major building at the University of Wisconsin-Madison campus. So this guy plays politics tough. You want to play with me? You got to do something about free speech on campus and something about DEI, or you don't get what you want. That's Robin Vos. But our immediate hero was mentioned earlier, Representative and Chairman David Murphy, who chairs the University and Colleges Oversight Committee of the what we call the Assembly, or the House of Representatives. As a result of a major survey done last year of over 10,000 students in Wisconsin, he decided to hold very in-depth hearings last spring. He held 4 or 5 hearings throughout the state, some at university campuses, some at the Capitol. Representatives of the National Association of Scholars were representative, and John Seiler, Senator Johnson was mentioned as an earlier speaker. The result of that has been that we did persuade, or as a result of that, pressure was brought on the president of the UW system to announce at that last hearing that he would eliminate the requirement for DEI statements in the hiring of faculty. Now, that's just a beginning, and Representative Murphy knows that. And as a result, he has sponsored legislation that begins to cover some of the topics I just mentioned, but particularly his first piece of legislation that he'll be introducing shortly with, I believe, a number of co-sponsors, and I believe will still receive consideration this fall, deals with free speech on campus. I wanted to just also emphasize that I mentioned the Wisconsin Institute for Law and Liberty. Through Freedom of Information requests, they got information from the UW system, which suggests that they're not fully on board with elimination of DEI, but they're going to rebrand what they call the former staffers in that area and are trying to do everything they can to avoid the Harvard decision on affirmative action. So there's a lot going on, but just in about 2 minutes, the highlights of the Murphy legislation are that they relate to free speech and academic freedom for all our colleges and our technical schools. So total, that's about 35 institutions overall. If you violate those standards, the standard, I won't go through all the standards, but basically it says you can't restrict lawful free speech on campus. I mean, he's our strong First Amendment proponent. So it doesn't fudge from the right or the left. You just can't do it. And then there are certain modest exceptions to that. Okay, so for violation of those standards, he really does come down on hard on the schools. If they violate it, they're going to have to announce in their admissions papers that they violated Wisconsin state law. They're not going to get grants for scholarships if they violate it for a year. And the person who violated it must be removed if they're from their administrative position, not their academic position. So he's going to maintain freedom of academic speech, but from an administrative perspective, you would be removed. The survey was interesting in that it showed that the conservative students felt that their free speech had been inhibited. And so that's what he was really trying to bring to the attention of scholars, that for the full university experience, we just can't be restricting freedom of speech, and especially toward our conservative students. I think there'll be a lot more in the future that he'll introduce and consider. I don't want to speculate too much on that, but first things first, this bill is out there. I know he's looking at a constitutional amendment that would address some of these issues as well. That does not require our governor to sign it. The legislation does. And so we have a very active legislative front here in Wisconsin. And I think a very thoughtful chairman who, again, is fully supportive of free speech, but comes down hard on discipline. But he said, but on due process, if you're accused of a violation, you've got to be able to have a lawyer. You've got to get evidence given to you in a timely manner of what's happened against you. And you've got the right to sue the Board of Regents or the Board of Directors of our technical colleges for a violation. So that's pretty slam dunk. Happy to take any questions, but I think we're probably due for our president, Peter Wood, to address us. So Benjamin, you can guide us from here.
Thank you, Bob. Yes, our remaining speakers are from our parent organization again. So I will turn the balance of the time over to Peter Wood. We've come full circle.
Well, due to the aeronautic educational complex, two of our speakers are not here. They've been captured somewhere in the air between, I think it's North Carolina and Texas and Lake Geneva. So you get me instead of John Seiler and David Randall, and you will lose something thereby. I think I want to start by saying what pleasure I take in having heard Daniel Hughes, Duke Pesta, and Bob Fiedler for, what can I call it, joviality. These are happy people. They're not here to moan how terrible their lives have been for taking a stand, but are looking at the world as a place where bad things happen, but that we can do something about it. And that seems to me to be where we really want to be. But I'll I'll take my shot here at saying someone has to speak up for gloom and pessimism, so I will accept that assignment. A few broad points, not a real well-organized presentation, but this might open up some avenues. I want to start with the premise that American higher education is an institution in serious decline. Probably nobody in this room is going to want to dispute that, but what kind of decline are we talking about? That's a more complicated question. Some things that haven't come up so far are the decline in enrollment, which is caused by many things, starting with the precipitous drop in the number of children born since 2008. The recession somehow triggered in the American public a desire to reduce fertility. And it's not something that just happened then. It has continued to this very day. We are in a nation where if the demographics, which can't really be disputed, are to be believed, by 2025, we will have a significant further drop in college enrollment. Then as far as the eye can see, it's going to be dropping at around 8% a year. Well, this is a fact with consequences. We are looking at an institution that since the 1950s has based itself on growth, on the fact that we will require or we will recruit to higher education ever greater numbers of students. And for a long time, that seemed to work. And when the highly qualified pool of students began to dry up or be exhausted, we lowered qualifications and brought in less qualified students, and that had consequences. But now, even if you scrape the bottom of the barrel, there just aren't enough students to fill the seats at our existing 3,000 and some colleges and universities. And that will mean that some of them will go out of business or find some other more honest line of work to pursue. But it's a fact that colleges and universities are certainly aware of. If you read the Chronicle of Higher Education, just about every issue has major articles about what you can do to save your college and university from the demographic cliff, as it's called. The cliff is in 2025, but there's more to the decline in enrollment than that. I don't want to go on too long in this, but it was thought when the great COVID shutdown came, though, that depressed enrollments, that there was going to be a bounce back. It never happened, or it has happened, but only so slightly as not to make any real difference. It's not across the board. Some colleges and universities are doing just fine in their enrollments. Harvard, Yale, and Princeton don't have any trouble filling up their seats, but other colleges do. I was the provost of one that has now gone out of existence, the King's College in New York City. But it's certainly not alone. There is a running list kept by one organization of the colleges that are now either closing or on the verge of closing. And that list is getting quite lengthy. All right, so why does enrollment kill colleges? If you think about it, there's not a necessary connection there. If colleges were inexpensive and were funding themselves through something other than tuition, they might get by. But the fact is that almost all our colleges and universities, with the exception being that the strata of the ones with huge endowments and the billions of dollars, are tuition dependent. And if the students don't sit in the classroom seats or Zoom in or something and pay those bills, then those colleges are facing financial exigency. It's happening now. Again, it's not newsworthy. It's talked about all the time in the councils of higher education, but it hasn't seemed to really set in with people. When the University of West Virginia finds itself in such dire financial straits that it has to close dozens of programs and lay off hundreds of faculty members, the AUP and the faculty members at the university are up in arms over this. Well, find some other way to save the money. Don't eliminate our jobs. Sorry, that's the way it works. If you have a university that is unable to make its finances, something's got to be cut. Eventually, it'll probably be the whole institution. But in the meantime, measures have to be taken. So when I talk about higher education as an institution in decline, I don't simply mean it's a financial rocky road and the prospect of closures down the road, which will affect some places more than others. But I also mean its decline in less tangible things, but quite important ones, prestige, public support, the, say the word credentialing, that is, they still offer credentials, but the marketplace is saying, maybe we don't really need those. And that becomes a factor that feeds back into the decline in enrollment. And then just to wrap a broad term around it, there's a cultural decline. That is, the values and ideals with which the American public entrusted this institution for hundreds of years to be the great custodian of, that confidence has faltered. It's gone away. And there's good reasons for that. I think Duke Pesta has given us a nice account of what some of those reasons are. I would say this about Duke's presentation. It's certainly a brilliant demonstration that K-12 education works. The kids learn what they're taught. And if they're taught to hate America, by golly, they will hate America with gusto. Might we try to teach them something else, and might that work? Well, it's possible, but it's been a long time since we tried. But anyway, it's a tangent. This issue of the decline in cultural authority, I think, deserves a little bit more fleshing out. That is, there are any number of areas now where we know the topics cannot be brought up on campus because there is an orthodoxy to be taught, there is a manufactured consensus, there is compliance to be enforced. And regardless of what your own views are about these things, it's undeniable that each one of them has fallen into this category of the enforced consensus. Try to talk about the government's response to COVID and higher education's lockstep support of Dr. Fauci's pronouncements, the shutting down of the Great Barrington Declaration, Dr. Bhattacharya's being turned into a non-person at Stanford. That kind of treatment of a major medical ailment involved an awful lot of duplicity. And regardless of which Chinese lab it came out of and whether the various medicines that some doctors were promoting would have been a better response, we can't have that discussion on campus. We can't have it in a medical school. We can't have it anywhere without being accused of being something very dastardly. Same thing with climate change. I happen to be on the skeptical side of the anthropogenic climate disaster that is being promoted all the time. But even if I were in favor of it, I think I would at least want to hear what the other side has to say. But that conversation is not going to happen on a college campus unless it's happening as we are in an underground room and out of sight and out of hearing of everybody else. There are organizations like the Heartland Institute that organize a national conference each year and bring thousands of climate scientists and physicists and other scientists from around the world to express their skepticism. Now, there is a strong counter argument about the nature of what climate disasters may face us in the future that a college student will never hear. And that seems to me to be something that the public gradually takes notice of, this validation of some ideas at the expense of being able to ask hard questions about those ideas reaches the American public as saying that what is college and university but an instrument of social control in which some ideas are given a privileged position and other ideas are just blotted out. So COVID, climate change, how about election integrity? I get my head handed to me on this one. I'm skeptical that the 2020 election was on the up and up. I'm not willing to say it was a stolen election. I think there was a lot of mischief in it. You can't express even any moderate idea about what might have gone wrong in that election without being called an election denier, a Trumpian radical, or something of that sort. Can't have that conversation means we will never have an honest election until that conversation becomes a possible one in which we can begin to look carefully at things. Well, there's other matters like crime. We have the narrative now that courtesy of Black Lives Matter, but also courtesy of the squeamish faculty members everywhere who think that to be opposed to a regime of rampant crime is somehow to be racist. So I live and work in New York City, and I'm surrounded by little stores that have gone out of business, first because of COVID, but now because shoplifting is legal in our city for all practical purposes. Try to run a store where people can walk in and walk out without paying for anything, and you'll be out of business pretty soon. And that's what we've got. A lot of news about that in places like San Francisco and Los Angeles, but it's not just there. I don't know if it's in Wisconsin, but it's certainly on the East Coast. Race, need we talk about race? I don't really want to talk about race. We talk about it endlessly, but the fact is we can't not talk about race. There's a category of academics who call themselves race realists who make me kind of squeamish. They want to promote the idea that there really are inequalities among the races that can be measured. I don't welcome them in my sort of circle of people whose opinions I really respect. That it worries me that we can't debate their ideas, that it has to be just assumed on the outset that any racial differences are to be regarded as a fiction created by the white supremacy to keep people down. Well, this runs into a hard problem, which is sooner or later going to have to be faced, which is that in the last 20 years or so, our ability to sequence genomes has gotten extraordinarily good and precise and broad. And we now know as a fact scientifically that there really are important differences among the races. Whether those differences should be regarded as having any social significance is another matter. But to deny that they exist runs into a problem that becomes difficult for the science to hide. And there we go again. Stuff doesn't exist invisibly. People do learn about it. They hear about it. So questions of safety, we now know that language is the principal danger to people. They hear words or ideas that make them feel bad. They're put into psychological peril. Their fragility is shattered by the things that they hear people say. That idea is now doctrine on college campuses. To try to wend your way around it involves taking really serious risks. You will be called out and denounced as somebody who's actually doing harm. Favorite word of the current generation. Safetyism, as Jonathan Haidt used that term, I think is one of the underlying doctrines now that has planted itself in higher education. Much of the rest of the country looks on the college as a strange place in which the normal resiliency and robustness of young people has been displaced by cowering weakness. And not only has it been replaced by that, but the cowering weakness is rewarded and regarded and elevated as a kind of moral stance. If you aren't cowering, then there's something wrong with you. Okay, so much for coerced opinions, manufactured consensus. Oh, should I mention pronouns? I was an expert witness in a case in Ohio in which I spoke up for pronouns, and that has gotten me into the circuit of being someone who is willing to pronounce that yes, we can call people by the pronouns that match the sex in which they were born, in which they will remain every living day of their lives, no matter what they do to themselves surgically or cosmetically, because our sex is in every cell of our bodies, and there's just no way around that. So you might as well match it with a pronoun. Okay, so that's a very brief excursion into why the institution is in decline. Maybe I should buttress it with a few stats. Nobody wants to really hear those, but Bain and Company has done a study called the Financially Resilient University. It's a follow-up to a study they did 10 years ago. But the main takeaway of this is that by Bain and Company's as financial consultant analysis, 40% of our large public universities have strong financial resilience and 60% don't. There's a precarious financial position, now I'm quoting, which will nearly double in the next 3 years. So the financial side of this spreads, the cultural side of it spreads, and we're left with an institution which probably, if you're in this room or on this call, you love. I love the university. I've spent my life in higher education. Most of you have as well. I don't say this with satisfaction or glee that this institution is in such trouble, but I see it as a kind of civilizational tragedy. We need higher education. We need something, some institution that will insert itself between childhood and adulthood in our complex industrial or post-industrial society that will prepare people to be both capable of mastering their own lives and to be constructive citizens in a self-governing republic. Our Constitution, I think Duke has rightly pointed out, it can't work if people don't understand most basic concepts. K-12 education isn't providing it. Of course, those teachers who were poisoning the minds of their charges came out of our schools of education. And higher education just reinforces, or if not reinforces, relaxes and accepts this level of appalling ignorance that pervades the world in which we're inhabiting. So there's that. Now, having given the sort of really gloomy picture, let me give the slightly less gloomy picture, which is that in light of what I've just been saying, American higher education has become, as never before in my lifetime, the focus of public and political action and concern. Having been in charge of NAS since 2009 and having been involved with these issues for a good many years before that, it's always been an uphill struggle to get the attention of any politician. I have talked to plenty of them in high positions, and the general view of, say, the Republican legislator has been, well, if the college is doing a good job, the graduates will get good jobs, and that's all we really need to worry about. As long as it's roughly matched to the marketplace and the employers are looking on this credential as something that they value, why should we worry? All these other things are just sort of good talking points during a political campaign. It's not really central to the future of our country, and it's not really an important political issue. Republicans for at least 50 years have viewed this as solely a Democratic enterprise. Let the Democrats shovel more money at the schools. We have other more serious adult matters to be concerned about. That has changed. Not for every Republican elected leader, not for every conservative or libertarian, but for a great many. Now their ears are open, and the existence of legislators in Wisconsin who are willing to step up and make this central to their political plans says a lot, but it's also the emergence of public groups of people mostly focused on K-12 education, but certainly willing to hear us out on the matters of higher education. I used to do a lot of speaking on college campuses. I am no longer welcome on college campuses, but I get invitations from groups of, I would say they're mostly seniors, but the Mayflower Society, the sort of groups of wealthy individuals who want to hold little lecture series in their apartments. And I go around the country talking to these groups that might be 15 or 20 people or 150 people. But that's just new. And I'm, of course, speaking as one person anecdotally, but it's not because I've emerged on the scene as this Jonathan Edwards of higher education who can rivet an audience with visions of doom. It's because they're concerned about what's happening to their children and their grandchildren, in some cases their great-grandchildren. I recently was invited to a nursing home in Pittsburgh, where I expected maybe a few doddering 90-year-olds might come out. I filled the room, and they weren't doddering people at all. They were people who were really asking sharp, informed questions and were concerned about what's going on. Are they going to change the world? No, but enough of us who raise this as a salient political issue begin to make some headway with it, I think. Now, I wish I had David Randall here to go through in detail his legislative proposals to fix things. He's much more policy oriented than I am. I'm a kind of anthropologist who likes big picture arguments, and I kind of shudder at the idea of sitting down and writing a 20-page bill with minute legalistic language in it. But he gets something out of that. And it's important to NAS that we have somebody who has that particular skill set and talent and is getting it across. I wish I had John Seiler here. His name looks like Sailor, but it said Seiler, who has demonstrated a remarkable talent for ferreting out the facts, the data that are twisting the minds of legislators and college presidents around the country. His first big breakthrough was getting hold of the notes of the graduate biology search committee at Texas Tech University, in which it just became black and white that this committee was tossing aside the best qualified candidates in order to fill a biology research position with a Black candidate. His account of that in the Wall Street Journal brought the announcement by the president of that institution the next day that he was eliminating its DEI requirements. The rock that he threw through that window would then spread throughout Texas, and the whole public university system in Texas, within a week of John's article, said, we're out of this business, we're not going to do it anymore. Well, I expect that they were lying. They are going to continue doing it. It's hard to uproot these things, but it's big progress that they made their official position that is to John's credit. Well, having discovered the magic tonic, John has been going around the country filing these DEI requests. He picked that idea up from our colleague, Neetu Arnold, who had started doing it. And before that, Rochelle Peterson had been doing it. But John has ballooned it into a giant strategy for knocking the pins out of public higher education. Of course, we can't use freedom of information requests, public information laws for private colleges and universities, but there are an awful lot of public ones that are knowingly breaking the law. One of John's favorite lines is a quotation from a faculty member. I don't want to misstate the name of the university, so I'll leave it blank, which begins, we break the law every day. And it's truthful testimony. This is someone who is actually proud of breaking the law every day, but okay, they know that it's not just the decision in Students for Fair Admission versus Harvard and UNC that's at stake here. There are plenty of laws that they're breaking every day that forbid racial discrimination in hiring as well as admissions. The root sin now of higher education is, we used to say that slavery was the besetting sin of the American Republic. Well, the besetting sin of higher education is racial discrimination. It's everywhere. I'm going to wander on if you don't stop me, then I don't want to bore you.
Let me see if we can bring it up.
I do want to, while Bruce is finding our participants, mention that some of the cases in which NAS has been actively fighting for the intellectual freedom of faculty members involve members of our board. So Amy Wax at Penn has not yet been officially fired, but she soon will be. And our newly appointed board member, Elizabeth Weiss, has not exactly been fired, but terminated. Oh, look at this. David Randall and John Silent. They've been hovering outside the door waiting for me to wrap up.
Well, we're only at 5:30 now, so we may want to go straight to questions since we only have another 10, 15 minutes as it is.
Okay.
And I believe if you are online, you can put questions in the chat or you could raise your hand. And then anybody in the room as well.
I've depressed them beyond all measure.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's kind of a silly idea, but what the number of people here that have spoken before, as well as you, Mr. Wood, what is your reaction to the idea of taking the concept of the camera for police and instituting that for classrooms, having all classrooms, K through 12 and public, and everywhere where there's a public classroom?
Well, first of all, I'm surprised. I never heard anyone frame that idea before. I would want to think about it a bit, but one issue, of course, is that we would be flooded with such a vast amount of information. I don't know who would be able to sort through it, but if it might put some people on edge about beginning their lecture with a political pronouncement outside the subject that they were appointed to teach, that could have a tonic effect. I would want to weigh that tonic effect against some of the drawbacks from it. It would make it particularly difficult for people who teach with Socratic method, in which they're putting forth provocative ideas that they don't intend to themselves support. So there would be costs as well as benefits from it. But I kind of like wiring up the third grade teacher who wants to begin class by saying, your parents are destroying the earth, go home and unplug the toaster.
We already did it in March of 2020. This is why parents have been flooding charter schools and homeschooling for the last 3 years.
Okay, very good point. We did give the parents a chance to see what nonsense was taking place, and the effect was devastating.
And I would say 80%, maybe more, of medical school lectures are recorded, live streamed via Zoom. I get to see bodies in the classroom because I give the very first lecture of the first year of medical school. All my colleagues who lecture after me, they see no live faces in the room. All the students are in their jammies live streaming or sleeping in and waiting till the recording is posted so they can watch it on double speed.
I've heard some of the counter arguments from faculty on this. And this is their intellectual property that's being stolen if it's being shown. And it's a matter of trade secrets that cannot be shared.
It's not, it's owned by the university.
Just to jump in real quick, as you know, there's two problems with it for me. One is right now at my university, the university I taught at, all of them, they have mainstream political talk on the left as normal. It's not, they don't see it as political. So it's only political if you go the other way. And so number one, who gets to get to control that, right? And it's going to be one more seat potentially, right? But the second thing about it too is if you're, the best teachers are provocative. They say things to rile kids up. They, like you said, the Socratic method means that you're going to play devil's advocate. And anybody can take a short clip of anything and turn it into a monstrosity. So I think there are some that, I think it would have a very limiting impact on how teachers can try to get around and reach kids. It's going to limit them pretty specifically, I think.
Well, I would start it with teachers in grade school and middle school. They have no Socratic teaching going on there. No. But anyway, just an interesting thought experiment thing. Someone else had a hand up.
Peter, maybe you're more optimistic than you realize. I mean, when's the counter-revolution coming is the question. And is any of the are any of the things you're pointing to perhaps indicative of a counter-revolution on its way?
I'm in that Hemingway school in his novel, The Sun Also Rises, where a man is explaining how he went bankrupt and he did it gradually, then suddenly. We're in the gradual phase. There may be that cliff where it happens all at once, but we're not there yet. A majority of American parents still believe that they do poorly by their child if they do not send said child to college. That majority has fallen quite significantly, but still it hasn't reached the point where sending your child to college is seen as the equivalent of sending them to a bordello. So it's.
I do have a question for everybody, actually, because to me, the one thing that's may save the universities is a double-edged sword. I see this, we're lowering of university standards because we're bringing in kids on the basis of inclusivity, not of preparedness. So I'm wondering if the plan here is that if the left gets its way, college will be 4 more years of public school. It'll be what high school used to be. You're going to require, and they would love that because then you'd have them, until they're 27, which corresponds with Obamacare when they become adults anyway. But a lot of us are teaching high school level stuff to college kids. My junior English majors have a 9th grade reading level. 9th grade.
It could go that way. And one way to fill the seats in the classroom is to put all the illegal immigrant children in them. Of course, many of them don't speak English or speak it rudimentally, so there's no good way out of this, I think. There are ways in which the higher ed establishment can sort of slump along from year to year, which it intends to do. As its finances get worse and worse, its immediate instinct has been to demand public subsidies. And in some states, that will certainly happen. The greater the public subsidy, the worse the colleges and universities will be intellectually and educationally. But the left doesn't mind that. Having legions of dumb, uneducated people is a good electoral strategy for the left. That still leaves, maybe I'm overly optimistic about this, but Western civilization has been around for at least 2,500 years. It's survived horrible things in the past. there's a fair chance that it'll survive this too. But maybe the locus of civilization will be moved off our shores. Just as the field of archaeology now is no longer going to be able to examine human remains and artifacts on the continental United States, so archaeology will have to move someplace else. Other things will as well. A fair number of us have the experience of having had students from West Africa enroll in our classes.
It's all lamenting.
They seem to be, on the whole, an extraordinary bunch and do it really well. Well, students from India, likewise, they tend not to go into the liberal arts so much, but where we have immigrant groups or people from abroad sending their children here, we see that the thirst for true learning is not extinguished in humanity. Well, we're doing our best to extinguish it among our own people, and we may succeed at that.
Can I be heard? This is White.
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
I had two comments to make. First and foremost, congratulations to Peter for writing to all these trustees who are pissed off about the way the presidents have behaved. I think we might get lucky, but you'd only get lucky if you try. And congratulations to Peter for trying.
Thank you.
The second thing I wanted to say is that I am now teaching in the honors program at Drexel for a term. And Drexel is a trade school. It was started by somebody a man named Drexel, who wanted to give education to kids that couldn't go to Penn. And it is the strangest school I've ever taught at. It's the most one of the most successful classes I've ever had. None of the problems that you're bringing up have occurred. It would take too long to explain what I'm doing and how I'm doing it, but it's there is hope in colleges. You got to have teachers with the right attitude and the students with the right attitude. And all I can say is, so far, I don't share any of the disappointments and difficulties that you see. I don't deny they exist. I know they exist, but somehow Drexel has figured out how to be so completely strange and completely out of sync with the rest of the university world that they have good kids who want to get jobs. The world does not owe them a living, and they know it.
Thank you.
That's
My
it.
wife went to Drexel, so I'm happy to hear that. Yes.
Is there not hope in your despair? I mean, we're gonna find out even, but anyway, if the colleges are so close to destruction and they're so rotten, isn't that a cause for rejoicing? When a ship sinks, all the rats on it drown.
But so do the passengers.
But, you know, if the cause is lost, why should we keep the institution alive?
I'm not of the school that we should keep higher education going on a ventilator. And the colleges that die usually die for a good reason. And many more of them will die, probably for good reason. There are others that probably should die, but won't because they're too wealthy and too well established to dislodge. The hope that I would have is that we will see a renaissance in the form of the creation of new institutions. I've said at other meetings on other occasions that the National Association of Scholars supports higher education, which is not synonymous with existing colleges and universities. There's other ways in which higher education takes place. My particular vanity is I send out these monthly fundraising letters in which basically I talk about great works of literature, sometimes not so great works of literature, but it's a matter of finding that there's a huge response to these letters of intelligent, educated adults who just love the idea of being able to engage in the world of ideas, outside any context of what colleges and universities are telling people they must think or should think. And the fact that I can have those kinds of conversations with a large number of people who they're not, for the most part, friends or acquaintances of mine, they're just people who care about higher education. And that to me is the signal that there is something out there to be built on to restore what's best in the American intellectual tradition, which is much broader than the American institutional higher ed tradition. Nonetheless, if we can find ways to nudge some colleges and universities back onto a track of teaching serious courses to serious students, I welcome that too. And we see some signs of that. Just earlier, we were talking about what's going on at the Wisconsin Medical College. Is that the name right?
Medical College of Wisconsin.
Medical College of Wisconsin. Well, the president of it, who's not the most sort of fearless leader, it has nonetheless decided that he wants to have this structured attempt to restore something like intellectual freedom on his campus. He's appointed serious people to his committee to do that. He's invited me to come back and talk at the college, which is in a way a brave step for him. This is a place that's already chased NAS off campus once, and now here we come again. So there's some ray of hope in that. And there's some hope in the way some colleges and universities have responded to the whole Hamas apologetics debacle. Most of the college and university presidents are keeping their heads low, or issuing namby-pamby statements about killing people's bad, but we're not going to say who killed what for what reason. But a few of them have actually come out and said, we cannot tolerate our students endorsing mass murder as a legitimate political tactic, whatever their grievances. And okay, I'll take what we can get in an era in which we are so often surrounded by moral cowardice, shameful behavior, intellectual depravity, and broad-spread ignorance. Any sign that someone is going to resist that is to be welcomed and celebrated.
How are we doing? Okay, so on that cheerful note from Peter, that's very true. And since Ben has, I think, gone to a cello concert, Yo-Yo Whitcomb, we call him. He's so I will bring this meeting to a conclusion. And thanks to everyone online who joined us today, and thanks to Peter for his remarks. And thanks for the staff and the Wisconsin Association of Scholars for convening now the second large-scale affiliate meeting of NAS affiliates since we did the California one earlier this year. So numbers are going up fast. Thank you very much. That was delightful to have everyone here. Thanks to Bob and all the organizers. And we're adjourned.
How's your Good. Set the table.
It's funny.